we are continuing on the series that I've been doing on spiritual gifts. And if you remember from the text I gave you from a few weeks ago, these spiritual gifts are mostly contained in these 4 chapters of the Bible. And they are overlapping each other, but mostly in these 4. But I'm speaking only for this, in this series, I'm speaking only from 1 Corinthians 12. There are especially the first 10 verses of the 1 Corinthians 12 that listed about 9 spiritual gifts. So we talked about it last week. We started because if you remember that the way they categorize, even though I'm not going to do it line by line, or I should say in order, but 1 Corinthians 12, the gifts that are listed there, 9 of them, they are categorized in these 3 groupings. Okay, so the knowledge gifts, which we discussed last week, and so today we'll talk about the vocal gifts, and then the last one is the power gifts. Okay, so again, they're not in order, but they just clump together in categories. Okay, so today's message again would be part 3 of spiritual gifts, which focusing on the vocal gifts. Okay, that we just saw earlier. Now, in 1984, I went to a conference called Urbana that James talked about it sometimes in the past, and then I may have mentioned it to you. But Mimi and I just started dating back then, and we went to a mission conference. The 3 of us with my cousin went together. It's a huge conference. You can't really see it well, but at my time there was at least 20,000 students. Okay, it was held in the University of Illinois and in Urbana. And it's mostly students, and today probably there's a lot more than 20,000 that attends. It's held every 3 years, and the focus of this conference is always about fulfilling the Great Commission. How can we, as believers, as young at that time, young people, coming together and being fired up, especially those who receive the call of God to go into some kind of ministry or some kind of mission. So it was very exciting because in my time, Elizabeth Elliot was one of the speakers, Billy Graham was one of the speakers, and some big name speakers. So these were the main sessions, okay? But apart from the main sessions in the morning and in the evening, in between there were many workshops that we can attend. And beyond the workshop, there are free times in which we can also attend different booth or mission booth, something that looks that, I'm sure many of you are familiar with, when you go to conferences or different conferences like this, where in the gyms over there, gyms after gyms, they were filled with little booths with all the mission organizations that are available that existed here in North America, at least, or maybe even the world. Okay, so there were hundreds. There was at least 200 mission organizations that were represented there, and so it was really busy. And then all the students were going from booth to booth, and I was one of them, and I was just really curious about the possibility for myself to go into ministry or into mission. But in that particular experience, I left a little bit disappointed and somewhat disgusted a little bit, because while I was going from booth to booth, as I was listening to the representative talking to different potential students who are inquiring about their particular mission, I remember hearing something like this. In one particular booth, I would hear the representative would ask the student. I remember seeing one young girl asking the representative, and the representative talked back to her and said, "Are you baptized in the Holy Spirit?" And she goes, "What's that?" And then he says, "Oh, do you speak in tongue?" And then she said, "What's that?" And then you can see, I can hear it. And then the representative said, if you're not baptized in the Holy Spirit and if you don't speak in tongue, you don't have the power of God to do the mission. You're not like a real Christian. And I could see that girl was intimidated by this representative who's talking. So I hear that kind of thing with my own ears. And then I would go to another booth, and the opposite would happen. And then the representative would say to that potential, missionary, and he would say something like, "In this organization, we don't speak in tongue. We don't allow speaking in tongue because speaking in tongue is from the devil. And if you have to be careful, because you might be being the devil and stuff like that." So I was there listening at least a few of this kind of conversation from booth to booth, and I went away from that conference or from that particular moment, and I was thinking in my mind. I said, isn't this sad? Why is this? I mean, the goal of this conference was one thing: how we can fulfill the Great Commission. How can we win people to Christ? But instead, in this, with my own ears, I've heard all the people attacking each other about this gift that is not super essential, but it's just one of the gifts. And so I just want to say this to you, because this topic that we're going to talk about today, the vocal gifts, especially the first one, okay, the speaking of tongues, is a very controversial topic. It is probably the most controversial in regard to the gifts, that's for sure, but maybe even one of the most controversial in regard to any topic among the Christians, okay? So it's important for you to understand that I'm coming here to explain to you what I believe it is, okay? And I am not trying to promote or demote one view over the other, okay? I'm simply trying to educate the church, in my research, in my understanding, what speaking of tongues, as Paul indicates over here, okay? So I'm not trying to say you have to do this way or that way, but simply explain to you, and of course you have to make your own decision. You got to pray about it, and of course do your own research, okay? So regardless of what the gifts that we're going to talk about, please remember again the primary purpose. The purpose is always to build the body for the common good, for everybody, to build the church, okay? And or the New King James puts it this way, that the manifestation of the Spirit is given to each one for the profit of all. So we need to remember that in all these gifts that we're going to talk about, the primary purpose is always about building the body. It's not about promoting oneself or oneself ministry or making money or getting rich out of it, but again, is to build the body. Okay, that's the primary purpose. And so here's the list, okay, that we want to just quickly read the verse 7 to 10. It says here that, for one is given the word of wisdom, another is the word of knowledge, another is faith, another is gift of healings, to another is the working of the miracles, to another is prophecy, to another discerning of spirits, to another different kinds of tongues, to another is interpretation of tongues. Okay? We talked about the first few verses already. I already expositorily detailed in verse 1, verse 2, verse 3, but that was last week. But now here we are in the list of the gifts. So we're going to talk about the more like the last three, which is the vocal gifts. Okay? So here's the vocal gifts. It starts with the speaking of different kinds of tongues. Okay? I'm sure all of you, no matter what kind of background you came from, you've heard about it. Okay? Probably. Now, of course, the word tongue is from the Greek word glossa, which really means tongue, but is often translated as language. Okay? So again, if you just want to know the background of it. Now, when we talk about the speaking of tongues, there are two different approaches or two different understanding. Okay, the first one is what they call it the xenoglossalalia. Okay, xenoglossalalia. Okay, so why don't you turn to your neighbor? Xenoglossalalia. Okay, go ahead. Okay. So as you know, glossa is already the tongue, and then it's a compound word glossalalia. But the word xeno, okay, the word xeno is a Greek word from xenos, which actually in the noun it means stranger or guest, or in the adjective it means alien, foreign, or strange. Okay. Now, the first view, the first understanding, xenoglossalalia, all Christian accepts. Everybody accepts this particular view. So one way we can define it is as this: it is divinely inspired speaking in a language foreign to the speaker, but known to a person listening. Okay? So a person who manifests this gift, xenoglossalalia, would be speaking a language that he himself or she herself does not understand, but the listener, the audience, does understand because it is a known human language. Okay? So it's like me suddenly speaking Mandarin, which I don't speak. But some of you who understand Mandarin suddenly, hey, PE speaking Mandarin, that's cool, But actually, I don't speak Mandarin. Okay, that would be xenoglossalalia. Okay. Now let's take a look from the scriptures. The purpose of when it happened. There's a couple purposes for this particular gift. Number one, it is for evangelism. Okay, and we see this most importantly, not for the first time that occurred, of course, was in the book of Acts. If you remember the book of Acts during the Pentecost, that particular special week, look what it says. And they were all filled with the Holy Spirit and began to speak with other tongues as the Spirit gave them utterance. And there were dwelling in Jerusalem Jews, devout men, from every nation under heaven.